On July 7, 1865, four of the Surratt boarding house conspirators, Mary Surratt, Lewis Powell, David Herold, and George Atzerodt, were executed for being part of John Wilkes Booth's assassination of President Abraham Lincoln. They were a part of a nine-member plot that the United States government prosecuted and convicted. Booth, the mastermind, was killed by a U.S. soldier during his escape a few months earlier. John Surratt faced a separate trial in 1867 because he ran off to Europe when everything went down and was released due to a hung jury for his role in the assassination. The remaining co-conspirators were immediately brought to trial, and after a 7-week military tribunal court which heard the testimony of over 300 witnesses, concluded with all 8 being found guilty. Mary Surratt, David Herold, Lewis Powell, and George Atzerodt were sentenced to death. Samuel Mudd, Samuel Arnold, and Michael O'Laughlin were each given life sentences in federal prison. Edmund Spangler received 6 years in the pen. Mary Surratt became the first woman in the United States to be executed by the federal government, despite pleas from her daughter and a letter signed by 5 of the 9 judges on the panel. Judge Advocate General of the tribunal, Joseph Holt, refused to grant her clemency and a life sentence. He didn't deliver the letter to President Johnson until July 5th. President Johnson would claim to have never received the letter. He probably didn't remember due to his extracurricular activities. But Judge Holt said that he gave him the letter and said to him, "Surratt kept the nest that hatched the egg." On the morning of the execution, she was visited by 2 Roman Catholic priests who heard her last confession. She maintained her innocence until death. Lewis Powell, before his execution, was visited by a Baptist pastor and an Episcopalian reverend. He talked about how Mary Surratt was innocent and George Atzerodt could have killed Andrew Johnson, but he didn't. George Atzerodt spent his final hours with Reverend Butler and whined about how he didn't want to kill Andrew Johnson because Booth wanted David Herold to do it originally because he had more pluck than him. During his trial, David Herold's lawyer tried to convince the panel that he was a feeble-minded soul who followed around Booth because he had him under his influence. But nobody bought it, and he spent the last night on Earth alone. On July 7, 1865, after a speedy trial and sentencing, all 4 were executed together. Before he had a hood placed over his head, Powell shouted, "Miss Surratt is innocent. She doesn't deserve to die with the rest of us." It took him 5 minutes to die after he was hung. George Atzerodt's last words were, "May we all meet in the other world. God, take me now." David Herold didn't die instantly when he fell from the gallows, and it took him 5 minutes to die as he flopped around, slowly being strangled to death by his own noose. Before a hood was placed over her head, Mary Surratt complained about the bindings around her arms hurting. The officer replied, "Well, it won't hurt for long." Before she dropped, her last words were, "Please don't let me fall."